Hey, everybody. We are here to talk about Drew Gibson. Now, if you're a student of form and working on your own, at one point or another, you have probably noticed and admired Drew Gibson for his exceptional distance and ultra compact effective form. And in keeping with our early versus late series, I want to go rewind the tape, so to speak, back about a decade ago to talk about where Gibson was early in his form development and some interesting features and takeaways that we might gather from what he went through. So back in 2013, we've got a younger Drew Gibson here about to tee off, and he was carrying a little bit more huskiness at the time, but you'll see here that he was actually a pretty loose, coordinated kid, even though his move looked quite a bit different. So let's check it out. So what do we notice about this form? A few things off the cuff. So most notably, the what he's doing with this rear arm might stand out to you. And so he's got the arm really high in the sky before he leads the disc into his throw. And I want to talk about that mechanic for a second because you're going to see some of the consequences of it later. So as the arm comes up, he hasn't quite got his weight onto this front foot. As he lands on this front foot, this arm is coming down and helping the leading shoulder, the throwing shoulder, come through into the throw. And he's a really whippy guy. By some accounts, Gibson has a 6'3" wingspan, even though he stands only about 5'10". So he's getting a lot out of these levers. And with this version of his early off-arm move, he's getting a good use of gravity here again. He's about to come high and land low and compressed into this and lead that disc right through here. Now, what's kind of interesting about his move is he does an X step back in 2013. So let's watch the legs here. So he's got the knees kind of coming in parallel. I tend to call this a side shuffle hop. So he's still getting a lot of momentum toward the target, and he's landing in a very firm plant embrace here. And he's helping to leverage that disc out with his pronounced lever arm action again here. But this is just kind of like a shuffle hop here. Almost a crow hop, except he's got his foot crossing behind, just not quite the knee. So this is kind of an interesting trick because a lot of people end up blocking their momentum forward through the X step. They're leaning too far back away. They're having trouble committing into the plant. Young Gibson doesn't have this problem because he's allowing his booty to kind of get a lead, but he's nice and squared up to the intended trajectory. And with his quick move here, he's got all of his weight forward ready to commit into the plant, and then he commits the shot. Okay, so right after that, about a year later, Gibson made a handful of pretty significant changes, but the kind of overall gestalt of the form, if you will, had a lot of the same features. And so you can see here he's getting the precursor to what's going to become his modern X step. So the foot is still crossing over, the knee's starting to cross just a bit behind. And here he's going to throw more of an Anheuser shot. And so you can already see that he's getting stacked up really nicely in relative alignment to that plant foot. And he's letting that arm commit the shot all the way through with this very loose freewheeling style preserved in the way that he's moving in this more compact form. So a couple of things are changing here that stand out right away. So he's, instead of bringing this arm up very, very high, he's allowing that elbow to just come out slightly and back inside his posture very quickly. So he's taken a lot of that sort of vertical action and committed it a little bit more horizontally, as we like to say. And if we look at another view on his throw here, so, notice as he's powering down, he's got a nice controlled tempo. He's using the lead of this pump and using the alignment of his forearm and the elbow to aim along the line. And that little bit of a pump there is helping him commit his momentum forward toward the intended trajectory. And so there, load up that backswing, let it rip. All right, so I think what this kind of compact form is doing right away for him is it's allowing him to take a little bit of that vertical spray and a little bit of that sort of hyzer tendency, and get a little bit control over his angles, even though he's preserving a lot of the momentous aspects of what he was doing before. Nice easy hyzer flip shot there. So if we take this rear view, this is something I like to point out to people who have trouble with committing momentum in their X step. So he's going to come very horizontal along the ground here. And right here, I want you to notice the orientation of the booty. So this is what we can call going downhill. So even though he's moving along relatively flat looking terrain, he's letting his booty kind of work the way that it would if you wanted to really move quickly in a downhill direction. And so his butt is pointing kind of more toward the ground. I call this the shirt illusion, because if you came around to the front of him, you would actually look like, because of his front leg, the shirt is pointing up, even though his booty is oriented down at this moment. And so that's going to allow him, as he lands onto this rear or drive leg, to keep that momentum moving toward the target with his butt clearly leading the rear leg. He's not leaning away. He's got everything nice and compact and about to commit to the plant. And as he lands in that plant, he's got a really nice looking brace like he had for the year before that. This stride is really short. So notice that he spends a lot of time elongating from this foot in a relatively short step with this plant foot here. And so I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle with, do I get the leg tremendously out in front of me? Do I want to keep it short? Like, where's it supposed to go? My advice and experience is mess around with it a little bit, because there's kind of a different sweet spot. It depends on, I think if you're trying to learn full power form, or if you're just trying to get braced up in the first place, nothing wrong with spending a lot of time on this rear leg and a short stride here. And, you can see that as Gibson is moving over this rear foot, how long he makes this backswing, right? So, with his really long limbs, that's part of the trick, right? He's got long levers to be working with here. That's a big source of power. He's getting nice and loose and deep into this. And by the time he's getting off this foot, you can see this stance here, right? So he's moving very athletically. He's coming off the rear instep. You can see the heel coming up. And that's happening at the same time that he's committing to the instep of the other foot. So he's getting very quick off of these feet. He's very nicely braced up. And then that leading hip is just helping bring all that momentum through the shot. And so this is a nice momentum trick, right? So this looks smooth. He's getting a lot of power out of this, just bringing his forward momentum and getting from foot to foot very quickly, getting loose and limber from the shot. So I call this the precursor to modern Gibson. This is a lot of the stuff there. And we're going to see some interesting changes in a second. Notice what he's doing with the rear arm. Sometimes you'll see him do this simple trick. And this is a nice one for folks if you've especially got longer arms. Comfortably resting the hand on the rear thigh to keep that elbow from flailing around behind you or wildly can be a nice way to keep the posture intact. So you can see here that as Gibson is landing into that plant, everything about this rear side is nice and compact, and he's going to bring that whole posture quickly into the plant and commit the shot. All right. So there's this kind of intermediate period then. So what we just saw wasn't quite looking the way it does now. This is the transitional phase before what we can consider modern Gibson's form. So around 2015, we've got a shot here. Okay, so let's break this one down a little bit, because he's made a couple of interesting tweaks here in this interim form. So that's a little subtle move, but I really think it's underestimated. So this is, again, a little micro pump. So as he's stepping, he's allowing the momentum of his arm to connect with that rear leg. And he's got still the elbow pump he uses now. It tends to come up a bit high relative to the ground, as does his weight. So his head was all the way up here. And by the time he strides off that rear leg, we've got a bit of vertical action preserved here in addition to the horizontal. So again, most players are somewhere in between. It depends how long they stride. It depends whether they hop or not. This kind of intermediate Gibson is having a little bit of a baby hop here. It's coming a little bit off the ground. And then when he makes contact, he's still staying pretty long on this rear leg. but he's actually lengthened this stride a little bit, and he's coming in a little bit more diagonally into his plant in this particular shot. So what's sort of interesting here, and a couple other shots around this range, was I think he was clearly playing a bit with where he gets his rear arm out of the way, as he puts it, bringing it more inside his posture, and playing a bit with kind of how he's stepping. And he talks sometimes about, I want to get off that rear foot as quickly as possible. So he's clearly experimented with this idea. He's got a preserved pocket integrity powering the shot. But let's watch the follow through real quick. So for focused here on the front foot, and he's braced up nicely. His foot has come all the way forward and over onto the ball of the foot here is his weight. And his knee, if you watch it, has hyperextended and then rotated all the way around. And then actually some of his weight is now coming back away from the target. This happens, actually. I've seen quite a few players now that as you're messing around with the way you get off the rear foot, kind of where the repercussions of that go can vary. And one of the things that in other sports is worth keeping an eye on, these are all correlational. It's hard to say. We don't have great data in disc golf, but when we see this little pop of the knee, right, all the way rebounding there, that tends to be related to, some knee issues down the line, lower back issues. So just something to keep an eye on here. But we see Gibson here getting, ultra compact, momentous, and taking what we saw before. All right. So around 2017, we see what I think of the earliest stages of modern Gibson. So this probably looks pretty familiar to you. He's got that rear arm nice and tight and compact, clearly a well-defined pocket, compact X step, committing into that plant. And, he tends to get such a momentous move and good compression off the ground. You even see his foot there come off to the right in the recoil, right? So it snaps off over to the right there. So this is a subtle thing, but watch the action of the off or rear arm here. So this looks a lot like what he does now, but he's clearly played at points where this elbow is coming in a little bit more forward. This one's coming a little bit more directly back toward the ground, actually very much like his move when he was much younger back in the 2013 maneuver. And this is a much higher line of play in this particular shot. So, I think there's a lot of advice about the off arm. I think that it's hard to say that there's any one definitive maneuver, and it's worth experimenting a little bit with how you bring that into your posture to aid your throw. Getting a nasty snap on that shot there. So another tournament that year, another angle here. So here he's not quite hopping as much. So he's clearly continued to get more and more compact in a few ways over time. So watch the top of his head. So he rather than hopping up is kind of standing tall and then striding off. And then the length of his stride is responsible for why his head is dropping, basically. So that shouldn't really be a forced thing, right? He's just, because he's striding a little bit longer here, his body is effectively dropping down into the plant. We don't see quite as much pump action here. So this too has gotten more compact, but his body, his butt is still leading that rear leg. And so again, by the time he's getting onto the plant, he's moving quick off that rear foot. Nice smooth swim move there. So again, the same year, another angle. Minimal X step again. So this guy is focusing on, as he talks about, quick and athletic off the rear side. So minimal X step. He's making sure he's getting some space for that backswing, loading up, and then coming back in quick onto the inside of that move. So the stride, again, to me, he's not trying to make this as long as humanly possible. It's just long enough so that he can build up some of that backswing compression, right? Load up this backswing, land, and then plants resisting, committing that momentum through the shot. And I love this shot because you can just see he's still bringing a ton of downforce and vertical compression into the shot, even though, it's not the highest distance line we've ever seen. But clearly, Gibson's forehand has preserved some of this hard vertical compression to the ground, and that's why you get this hopping like recoil after the fact. So just kind of an interesting feature and residual from his earlier form. Max distance contest. I love this. This is something I've started to pick up. So if you're somebody like me, weightlifting background, I tend to stay glued to the ground. It's very bad for disc golf, especially for distance work. You want to be quick from foot to foot without screwing up the leverage as you get foot to foot. So I love these little patter steps that you'll see on distance shots. And the reason I love that is it just, kind of primes your legs and says, yep, we're getting ready for some distance. So for a lot of players, they try to do too much of this too early, I think, and they lose contact with the ground. As you get a little bit later on, you can play with little stutter steps and tricks like that, just to get yourself into the mode. Okay. So it's getting closed off to the target by the time the X step is coming. So he's moving down the line, committing his momentum forward, getting increasingly closed off, light and balanced on this rear foot. Right. So again, this rear foot is something to commit balance, and you want a leveraged backswing against it, but you do not want it slowing you down. So this guy is still coming over that drive leg or rear leg move, boop, with his weight forward, and he's just accelerating off of it, maintaining leverage, getting the backswing. The knee is just dropping because his body keeps moving forward. You never want to force this. Lands in the plant, commits the momentum. Different angle in the same shot, right? So again, this knee just outside this hip, right? So he's not really reaching this as long as he can. Again, this is an iterative thing over time. He's clearly put work in over years to find his sweet spots and where his body is moving well. And as soon as he's landing in that, right, he's quick off this leg, he's resisting, and then the arm is committing through into that. The rear elbow is more inside. His shoulder is out of the way of the throw. And that elbow, as it comes in, is helping him commit that momentum. Watch it come from here to down. Comes down and inside the posture to help him commit all of that momentum forward, resist the ground, comes up the chain through the arm. Ridiculous. So if you might have noticed it real quick, watch this front leg. Still see some evidence of that hyperextension. You still see some evidence of him coming around. His momentum tends to stay a bit more forward than it did back in 2015. So 2022, 2023, he's changing things here and there, but this is more or less his mature modern form. Something I love about watching this guy is he's just a textbook in the late chain kinetics and committing the late acceleration as a consequence of the momentum he brings in. And so what I mean by that is he's moving really slow and controlled, a nice tempo here. Slow, 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 lightning quick. So quick you can barely see it even on a half slowed down camera, right? So these are the effects of obviously doing this for years, but also because, again, he has this pristine balance off this rear leg. He's got his butt leading, so he's got all of his mass moving forward, ready to commit the shot, landing in the plant. And as soon as he's getting off this rear foot, again, as quick as possible, he's down-tempoed, moving slowly, but he's moving quick with respect to the shift. And no sooner is he in the shift as he's committing the force through the leading or plant leg and coming up the chain to lead that shot. So I always, when I look at Gibson versus Simon, I think of Gibson as more like a karate master and Simon a little bit more like an Aikido or Judo master. It always has looked to me like Gibson's got a little bit more of this just ridiculous late snap on the swing, whereas Simon's comes a little bit more from some of the redirection mechanics in the way that his body and arm move. Gibson is all, let's load it up, let's commit all of that momentum toward the shot out of the peak of the backswing. So one more final view on him. There's that little bit of a pump again. Elbows coming up high. So he's played again and around with this. So he now, as a 2022, comes up a little bit off the ground, a baby hop with the pump, and he's just following that through with this nice long stride off the rear leg. You can see the heel is already way up. He's coming off the rear foot instep. He's not forcing this. He's not spin shifting. He's just shifting his body weight diagonally a bit toward the target. Real quick off that front leg, using those long levers and his quickness to his utter advantage. This is just exquisite. So what I've noticed too is just interesting is let's watch that front knee. There's maybe a little bit of hyperextension in some of his shots. To me, this has looked like it's toned down a little bit. It looks like in his lower back, he's a little more relaxed than he might have been previously. One of the things I like to just kind of keep a casual eye on is, is there injury potential and things like this? And again, it's a lot of it is correlational, but in general, we want to try to mitigate stretching out too much through the lower back and putting strain there. We don't want to extend it too much. We don't want to hyperextend joints into the release or follow through. All right, so I hope you thought some of those pointers there were interesting, and thanks for tuning in.